This is the story of Josef Fritzl, the man who caged his daughter for 24 years, and of her fight for freedom. The bond of a daughter and her father is one of the most precious in the world, and in most cases, the father is the lamp of her daughter's life, a beacon of light and hope, and someone she can rely on as she grows up and becomes her own person. In most cases, this is not the story of a loving father or a happy daughter. This is the story of something polar opposite. The story of a man who, instead of bringing light, was the one keeping his daughter in darkness. Our story starts simply with a hot day in August 1984. Josef had finally completed his ambitious project, and making up an excuse about needing some help and putting the final touches, he led his daughter deep down the cellar he had created. He had been building this basement for multiple years, getting the permission for it from authorities in the late 1970s. The Cold War was at its height, and having nuclear bunkers was only prudent. But no one knew that the idea Josef had in his mind was much more different than any nuclear bunker. As Elisabeth Fritzl followed her father down the stairs and going deeper into the earth, one could say she was being swallowed by the ground, maybe never to be seen again. After Elisabeth got down there and helped her father fix the door, she suddenly found a cloth covering her mouth and nose, soaked with ether, her world going dark. It was the start of a cruel string of events, and when Elisabeth finally came back to consciousness, she found that she couldn't move more than half a meter on either side of the bed, her hands tied behind her back with an iron chain. After 2 days, he gave her a little freedom of movement by attaching the chain to her waist. Though 6 months later, even the chain went away, removed because it was hindering his sexual activity with his daughter. After chaining her up in his dungeon, Josef would visit and rape her multiple times a day, from the second day of her incarceration right up to her release in April of 2008. In the 24 years that Elisabeth was caged for, Josef would rape her over 3,000 times. This also led to her giving birth to 7 babies, who had to watch the abuse firsthand as they slowly grew up. One of those babies, a twin called Michael, died shortly after his birth in 1996, expiring at just 66 hours old. He died due to some breathing difficulties and negligence by Josef. He admitted in court later, "I don't know why I didn't help. I just overlooked it. I thought the little one would survive." Later, he would burn the body in an incinerator, almost feeling no remorse for the child he accidentally killed. Out of the 6 remaining kids, 3 of them were moved upstairs. But how did no one suspect him for so long? The truth of the matter lies in what was happening before Josef started his plan. Elisabeth was being sexually abused long before her being caged, and due to this, she had repeatedly tried to run away from home. Her mother was unaware of the problems she was facing and believed that she was just a troubled child. This allowed Josef to create the perfect lie. The lie that his daughter had once more ran away from home to join a cult. A missing person report was filed, but no matter how much people looked for her, no one could find a woman who wasn't there. The lie was perfected by Josef, making his daughter write down letters addressed to her mother and himself. He would even drive multiple towns over and mail them to himself. He did a similar thing with the 3 kids he had moved out of the dungeon. They just appeared on the doorstep of the Frankel household with a letter supposedly from Elisabeth, claiming that she was well, but with her lifestyle, she just couldn't handle kids. Knowing her daughter, Fritzl's wife Rosemary never suspected a thing, nor did the authorities. It took more than a decade for everyone to realize just how big of a mistake that was. The 3 kids that were left in the dungeon ended up staying there, never being exposed to sunlight until Elisabeth was freed. The conditions in the basement were abysmal. It was perpetually cold and damp. The rats would bite at them. Water seeped in through the walls in such high quantities that she had to soak it up with the little towels available to her. Winter would leave her half freezing to death, wanting as much warmth as she could get. But she would later write in a calendar that summer was the worst time of the year because the whole room would turn into a sweaty sauna and the heat would become intolerable. But all this torture was insignificant when compared to how she was treated by her own father. Throughout her captivity, he repeatedly threatened Elisabeth by saying, "If you do not do as I say, your treatment will get worse, and you will not escape from the cellar anyway." He repeatedly beat and kicked her. He also subjected her to humiliating sexual abuse, including forcing her to reenact scenes from violent pornographic films. The abuse left her with serious lasting physical injuries and psychological damage. During the first 5 years, before the first baby was born, she spent all her time completely alone because Josef rarely ever spoke to her. He had also convinced all of them that if they were to try to escape, they would all die. The official indictment said, he told them he had installed a system so that the doors would give them electric shocks if they tried to open them, and that poison would be released into the cellar if they tried to escape, killing them all instantly. This allowed him to keep them under control for over 20 years. The end of this ordeal came when Kirsten, Elisabeth's 19-year-old daughter, became gravely ill. Fritzl, showing uncharacteristic mercy, put her in his Mercedes and drove to the nearest hospital. There, the doctors became deeply suspicious of the deadly pale creature with bad teeth who lay dying in intensive care. Repeated media appeals were broadcast for the mother to come forward with information that was necessary if they were going to have any chance of saving her life. Elisabeth and her 2 boys viewed the appeals on the television in their cellar. She pleaded with her father to let her out. His powers waning, his ability to keep 2 families sustained reducing by the day as he aged and his heart grew weaker. He had already begun to hatch a plan as to how he could release his daughter without too many questions being asked. He relented, perhaps for the first time ever. He told the hospital the family had appeared on his doorstep, having escaped from their sect. But the doctors and police did not believe his story this time round. At the hospital, Elisabeth was whisked into a room away from her father, where police threatened to charge her with child abuse because of the way she had clearly neglected her daughter. Elisabeth said she had a completely different tale from the one they expected to hear. She would start to tell them only on one condition. They promised her she would never have to set eyes on her father again. Before we finish off this video, one more important thing I wish to bring up is the blatant lying that Josef and his lawyer attempted to do once he was put on trial. Fritzl had denied enslavement for a long time. His lawyer, Rudolf Meyer, tried to explain Fritzl's decision to imprison his daughter and force her to submit to his every whim as the act of a devoted father. Fritzl's original defense for how it all began was that Elisabeth was a wayward child, and that he was only trying to protect her by locking her away from the outside world. Drugs, drink, and bad company had threatened to drag her down, he argued. His lawyer tried to paint him as a caring man who spent time and money maintaining both of his families. He even took a Christmas tree down into the dungeon, said Meyer, and school books, an aquarium, even a canary. In what now seems like a sick joke, he said that the canary's ability to survive was proof that the air in the cellar could not have been that bad after all. Today, Josef Fritzl is serving a life sentence, convicted of rape, incest, enslavement, and negligent homicide. Fritzl is being held in Stein, a high-security psychiatric prison in Krems on the river Danube. Around 88 years old today, he would most probably die in jail before he has a chance of being released in 15 years. Hopefully the details of this sordid affair would ensure more precaution so similar situations can be avoided in the future.